We're about 5 days away from the release of Pokemon Legends ZA on Nintendo Switch 2, and it's really starting to look like this isn't going to be like the revolutionary title that, completely kills the narrative that Switch 2 has failed. Instead, it is the title that is going to kill the narrative that Pokemon is failing, which is a completely different thing and a completely different issue that has been long overdue in my mind. Because over the past couple of years, we've had to sit and watch people like try and moan, complain, and whine about Pokemon. Trying to say it's the worst thing ever, that Game Freak's lazy, that they can't innovate, that they can't do anything more. Like, oh, I want to have real time battles with better graphics, and I don't want to go through the same old gym structure, and I want like people have been crying about all sorts of like crazy things about Pokemon over the past decade or more, and the Legends side series has been really really good at kind of alleviating a lot of people's like issues with mainline Pokemon. Because they do things a little bit differently. They do innovate. They are a little bit more creative. They do have like stronger stories. They feel more like serious RPGs, honestly. Pokemon Legends Arceus is honestly one of my favorite Pokemon games of all time now. My game of the year 2022, and a shining example of just how great of a company Game Freak actually is. Something that has been heavily disputed in recent years, and considering like the legacy of of Legends, considering like how successful Scarlet and Violet is, how successful they were, how well received Gen 9 was in general. Like, I think we are at the point now where the Pokemon community is getting to the point where they are going to reject the naysayers. And it's very possible that like Pokemon Legends ZA and then like Gen 10 are going to completely dismantle the entire cope and seed, because we were told when Power World came out that it was going to eclipse Pokemon, that it was going to be bigger than Pokemon, that it was going to sell merch like Pokemon, it was going to have its own animated series. None of that surfaced, none of that's happened. And meanwhile, Pokemon's killing it with merchandise, with the trading cards, and with the animated series and the video games. And in a lot of ways, the video games are bigger than they've ever been. The entire like narrative that like Let's Go failed, that Sword and Shield failed, and that Scarlet and Violet failed are just complete copes. And I think people are going to be really really shocked at how well Generation 10 actually does, especially because this is probably going to be something that is cross gen, that is going to be re-released on released on Switch One as well. And as a result of that, is going to have like an install base of like what 170 million units, probably, if not more than that. So you're probably going to see Gen 10 be the most wildly successful Pokemon title ever. And like when that happens, especially if the game is like very well received, like what leg are the Pokemon haters going to stand on? Because like we saw a similar situation happen with Gen 4, right? Because the Pokemon Gen 1ers were like a pretty prominent thing like up until like Gen 6 came out. Like they were saying that like Pokemon hasn't been good since, that like the series was dead. And then like Soul Silver and Heart Gold came out and brought a lot of these people back. That's kind of my mindset. Looking at what Pokemon's doing now, is that like this is going to be huge with a lot of different people, and naysayers can't just sit there and say that it doesn't run well, or that it doesn't play well, that it isn't good, because that just isn't true at all. In fact, we're already seeing them like blatantly make things up about the game. Like one of the examples I've seen is the DLC. People claim the game has a DLC, day one DLC story expansion. Not true. Like the story expansion does not release until February 28th. So, this big talking point for a lot of other people, this idea that Nintendo is selling you day one DLC, it's not actually true. So, like when you keep things like that in mind, when you look at like what ZA is doing, when you look at like what how excited the fans are, like what you're seeing is like the vibe of a culture shifting, in which like people aren't really going to sit there and tolerate like YouTubers complaining about Pokemon, especially after the Power World lawsuit. like you can't sit there and accuse Nintendo of being lazy, derivative, uninspired when like Pow World is just hasn't even left early access yet. When Pow Farm is just a knockoff of Pokepia. Like Nintendo is clearly stomping their competition, and there is just this very strong unwillingness from the community to acknowledge that. And at a certain point, it's going to completely implode. And I think it's going to implode the same way it always does, in which, like, a Pokemon product is so universally popular and beloved that it brings a lot of lapsed fans back. And I think that's kind of what I think is going to happen with this, with ZA. Like a lot of people who grew up with Gen 6 are going to be very excited about going back to Lumio City, exploring everything and just having this more versatile like experience, with this iconic location. I've seen a lot of people coping and seething like, oh, it only takes place in one city. Like, yeah, like the most iconic city probably in all of Pokemon at this point. Like Lumiose is gorgeous, and one of the only things I really remember about X and Y are things in the city, and like having a fully like explorable like city with its underground like battle league and stuff like that. Like all of that just seems really, really, really cool and appealing. And I have to like bring up this opinion that like why exactly am I supposed to believe that this game is not going to do well, that it's not going to be good, that it doesn't look good. Like I keep seeing like YouTube videos saying the game looks awful, that it looks static and it looks unresponsive, and yet like I'm myself am super excited for it. Like whenever I see a YouTuber like complaining about that, I just think back to all the times I heard them say the same thing about Scarlet and Violet, about Sword and Shield, about Let's Go, all of which were just fantastic games. And I also think about how they tried to shill Power World, an infinitely inferior product that was plagiarized from a variety of different sources and really had no business getting the attention it deserved. Like I've talked about this like time and time again, but people really underestimate how good of a brand Pokemon actually is. How well run it is, how well it's presented, how how good the brand synergy is. Like people are just going to be very, very shocked, I think, at how well Legends ZA does and how well Gen 10 does. Like I think we're on the verge of a kind of like a second Pokemon renaissance, because ever since Gen 5 came out, there's been this feeling that like the series is on the decline, man. Like it hasn't been good since. It's the same kind of mentality that people had after Gen 1, like in a lot of ways, the people complaining about Pokemon now are the new Gen 1ers. Like it's the exact same mentality. Like Pokemon's good, Pokemon's bad now because I didn't grow up with it. That's kind of the mentality that these people have. And at a certain point, like I do think that's like the crux of the issue is that the people who are complaining now are the people who grew up with like Soul Silver and Heart Gold and played Black when it came out and have seen like everything else as being like a massive downgrade. Like at a certain point, like we are going to get a Pokemon game that's better than those. And in a lot of ways, I think Legends Arceus already was. So I think it's pretty much inevitable for Pokemon to kind of have this kind of like resurgence in popularity to the point where people start clowning on these idiots again. And I'm very interested in seeing just when and how it happens, because in my mind it cannot happen soon enough.